Flight attendants and pilots, what NSFW things occur during your jobs? My flight director found a bag that was moving in the overhead bin. It turns out, it was a young girl in a bag. Out of Port-au-Prince. Haiti. It was a sex slave Haitian girl being sent to Canada. As a flight engineer in the AF flying out of an island in the Pacific, a sailor had fallen overboard and drowned. The Navy recovered his body a few days later. Since this is downrange, only a body bag is available, not a transport casket. Before takeoff, the loadmaster comes to the cockpit screaming, yelling and babbling. He says the body in the bag is wiggling. Turns out eels have entered his body via his mouth and are wiggling within his body and causing the movement. Just a plain passenger. But this happened on my last flight. About halfway through, the pilot comes over the intercom and says, "Please come out of the bathroom. Smoking in an airplane is illegal." Naturally, this gets the whole plane on edge. Turns out, it was an old woman who was completely naked and vaping in the bathroom while refusing to come out. They eventually had to break into the bathroom and take her out, which then caused the woman to try and fight the flight attendants. She was arrested as soon as we landed. My wife and I bought last-minute tickets to a family event and could not get seats next to each other. Once we boarded, I convinced the guy sitting next to my wife to switch seats with me. Nice guy takes my assigned seat, which was next to a woman who was apparently suffering from the flu. 5 minutes after takeoff, she projectile vomits, but tried to use a pillow to cover her mouth, which just made the vomit spray out sideways, all over the poor guy. He just sits there for a moment, frozen, and then slowly turns back to look at me with his face that said, "You did this to me and I will forever hate you for it." I offered to buy him a drink, but he ignored me. It was a 6-hour flight. I was a flight attendant for 6 years. Summer flights to party islands like Ibiza, Mallorca and Mykonos could get quite raunchy, like women boarding in fishnets, wanking and blowjobs at the back of the aircraft. Not me, but a friend who's a flight attendant who came across this really stubborn male passenger who wanted a sanitary pad that he saw the flight attendant hand over to a female passenger, convinced that it was an eye mask thingy you put on before sleeping. Arguing with her about it, she finally gave in and gave the sanitary pad to the guy, who coolly removed the anti-adhesive and stuck it on his eyes and went to sleep. Not a flight attendant, but the guy behind me got detained once we landed because he was playing with himself next to 2 girls in their 20s. Father was a commercial pilot. He has lots of stories. His most WTF NSFW story was probably having to deal with a lactating woman breastfeeding her cat and coach. Not totally on topic, but I fly a lot for work. And one time I walked to the bathroom as a flight attendant was walking out. She saw me heading in right after her and said, "Be careful. There's a bomb in the bathroom." I think it was a nervous reference to her having just blown up the toilet. And she quickly realized what she said as I gave her a perplexed look walking into the bathroom. She pulled me aside as I walked out and apologized profusely, probably knowing she'd have lost her job if someone less understanding had heard it. My girlfriend at the time and I once had sex in an airplane bathroom. It was actually quite easy to get in and out undetected, but in retrospect I think we were lucky with the timing. The thing they don't mention is how hard it is to actually have sex in there. Those rooms are tiny. I would imagine lots of tray tables being left up and seats not being in the full upright position. One time I was watching a movie and a hot scene came on. I got a stiffy and hid it under my blanket and changed the channel. *edit, hid not hit, but going to leave typo. Well, there is a picture on Reddit somewhere on Public Busted where 2 busted Latvian girls have their tits out on Ryanair flight. I was there and saw it. They were afraid that they will get in trouble. I chose not to act on it. My mom has been a flight attendant for Air Canada for 43 years. I've heard lots of stories, but one always stuck with me. Back in the 80s when China was just opening up, my mom would get a lot of older folks from rural China on her flights from Beijing or Hong Kong. Apparently many of these people had never used a modern flush toilet before. On more than one occasion they would simply close the lid, position themselves on top of the toilet, and promptly defecate on top of the toilet seat before leaving. Also, many of these folks would apparently just suck up huge gobs of phlegm and spit them right in the middle of the aisle. Luckily, things have gotten better in the intervening years. I was on a flight to China. One of the passengers up in business class decided to take advantage of the unlimited drinks he was offered before takeoff. He got plastered. When the plane started to take off, he decided to take a sleeping pill to tide him over for the 14-hour flight we were about to endure. Well, shortly after takeoff, the guy decided he needed to use the bathroom. He ventures back to where the stalls are, but shoots past them. He walks about 3 rows ahead of my row, whips out his member and pisses all over the row and the people in it. They had to move the passengers, rip out the seats, and monitor the guy for the rest of the flight. Whatever happened to him? I have no idea. I'm just glad he didn't hold it in for 3 more rows. Not pilot or flight attendant. And actually happened during TSA screening. After a weekend of EDC in Vegas, everyone is lined up to go home. Strike up conversation with a girl in front of us and she mentions how she had a surplus of party favors left over from said festival. She said she didn't know what to do with them and decided to take them before getting on the plane. TSA takes one look at her eyes and tells her to lift up her shirt or something like that. Didn't quite get the gist of it. And she lifts up her entire shirt with bra, flashing the TSA agent. She was promptly escorted into secondary. 5 minutes before the plane was due to take off, she ambles on the plane and finds a seat. Flight attendant here. Pilots are hooking up with flight attendants constantly. I've walked in on 2 different guys in the bathroom. Lock it. People. A couple weeks ago I had a lady use the lav and didn't even shut the door. I see camel humps daily, the male equivalent of a camel toe. I've cock-blocked people trying to get into the Mile High Club. There's also plenty of rumors of pilots and flight attendants hooking up mid-flight. But I myself have never experienced this. When one pilot has to go to the bathroom, a flight attendant will go up in the flight deck. Oh, and last year I had a guy who was drunk/on drugs and groped a female passenger. Guy got arrested obviously and I had to give a statement. I'm a co-pilot for a company that charters private jets. We had a customer who boarded with his brothers and several beautiful women in revealing clothing. And in the air we could hear a party going on in the back. Loud music. Men laughing and cheering. Girls giggling. After a while the door opens and someone taps me on the shoulder. I look and a completely naked woman casually asks me how much longer we have before landing. I tell her we have a couple more hours to go. And she returns to the back. Obligatory, not a flight attendant. I was a ground handler. But there was an FA that came through our station regularly who once discovered a man who had stripped down to absolutely nothing and was masturbating and attempting to ejaculate onto the sleeping woman next to him, who was a stranger. This was on a small aircraft, memory is fuzzy on that. But I believe it was an EMB 145, and they were sitting in the back row. Which is how he managed to get naked without being caught. I have a friend who is a flight attendant. They described to me a situation where a man was masturbating in his sleep. Viagra and Ambien was a poor choice. My cousin Walter jerked off in public once. True story. He was on a plane to New Mexico when all of a sudden the hydraulics went. The plane started spinning around, going out of control. So he decides it's all over and whips it out and starts beating it right there. So all the other passengers take a cue from him and they start whipping it out and beating like mad. So all the passengers are beating off, plummeting to their certain doom. When all of a sudden, the hydraulics kick back in, and the plane rights itself. It lands safely and everyone puts their pieces or whatever you know away and aboard. Nobody mentions the phenomenon to anyone else. Not NSFW. But I was sitting across the aisle from a mom and her toddler daughter. The little girl vomits all over her mother about halfway through the flight. A minute later the smell wafts over to me and I glance back and see that the mom had vomited from the smell. Both of them just covered in vomit. I remember thinking the only way this could get any worse is if the flight attendant vomits while helping them clean up. My wife is a flight attendant. Many of her male co-workers are gay. If you're a promiscuous homosexual male, the flight attendant lifestyle is made for you. These guys get on Grindr and have a date set up before the plane lands. New guy, new city, every night. One time on a flight from Paris back to America, this woman had a baby with her but was acting very suspicious. Turns out it had been a giant block of cheese that she didn't want to ship or check, so she wrapped it up a blanket and put a bonnet on it. Somewhere in r/flashing girls, if you find it, you can't go wrong. Company logos are on a broad display. So I worked for a cargo airline. We once got a priority mail box labeled live reptile, loaded into a bulk cargo compartment. The box was empty. I was on a flight back from Brazil. Since the flight was 13 hours, the attendants kept offering refreshments. The woman next to me refused. Just kept saying she would get something when we landed. Since she didn't eat anything for the entire flight, major indicator of drug smuggling, the crew rang ahead to the police and she was immediately arrested soon as she got off the plane. When I was 12, I was a passenger on a flight back in like 2006. And like an hour into the flight attendants started banging on the bathroom door and screaming to the man in there to get out of the bathroom. The guy wouldn't open the door. After about maybe 10 minutes of this, an undercover cop came and kicked the door in, pulled the guy out and wrestled him to the ground, and just pinned him down. The cop just held him there, in one of the most painful and aggressive looking holds, as we did an emergency landing. As soon as we landed, security rushed onto the plane and grabbed the dude and dragged him off the plane. We were stuck on that plane for like 5 ducking hours. If he was an attempting terrorist or maybe a bad guy trying to flee the scene of a crime or what, but it was really weird. Not really NSFW, and I'm not a pilot, but my uncle is, and when coming into land his co-pilot spotted a massive praying mantis on his leg and he just had to stick it out for the landing. He was first off the plane. When flying in northern regions of Canada, many operators push their pilots to break minimums, the minimum height above the ground you can fly on an approach during days with very low cloud ceilings, in order to keep their planes on time and not have to divert to another airport. This is extremely dangerous as minimums give you guaranteed clearance over obstacles, and as soon as you go below them your safety is not guaranteed. Many planes have crashed this way. And most operators who would do this have gone out of business because of it, but there are still some out there.